Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Eric Siepen. I'm pastor of the village in Tucson, Arizona, and I am sitting across from Andy Littleton from Mission Church in Tucson, Arizona, and we are not live, but we're actually in our podcast studio at the village. And we did an interesting podcast today.
Yeah, we meandered for a bit at the beginning. The main topic is about our friend Rod, who is a developer of souls, a cultivator
developer.
Soil. I don't know. He the Colossus of Christianity. The what are all the other Babe Ruth? The Sultan of.
We're not people who can actually put the rhyme down. We're not. That's not us.
Yeah, my rap career didn't go anywhere. But
I never
the
started one.
Sultan of systematic theology.
There you go. The Sultan of.
He's not though.
The Sultan of Soul Care.
The Sultan of Soul Care. There you go. But yeah, we talk a little bit about some random stuff.
Just fun stuff.
Yeah, at the beginning. It's good too. And then we get into our conversation about Rod, why he's made a big difference in our lives and the lives of others. And I think that would be, I would recommend listening to that and considering how you offer your life and the people that you do you have somebody like Rod in your life? That's a good question to ask yourself as you listen to that. So enjoy.
Yeah. So before we go off the air, I just want to say, and you'll find this funny again because this is just my personality, but I listen to a lot of podcasts. And I just am amazed every time I listen to our podcast, not in how remarkable the things we say, though I am pretty amazed by that. Because I do this podcast and I think, I don't know. And then I listen to it and I'm like, oh, wow, God really used this I think there's some evil things. But what strikes me is the audio is so good on our podcast in comparison to so many other professional podcasts that I'm thinking maybe if this all, goes south, whatever goes south,
you and I
have a career in setting up podcast studios for people.
But we probably need to stay in relationship with Mike Almaroth, who actually picked the equipment.
Yes, Mike picked the equipment and kind of came up with the designs, and I just copied him, and it's beautiful.
And I just said, thank you.
Yeah, so that will be your role in the company.
Okay.
All right, everybody enjoy. Check. Hey, we're live. We're eating scones, drinking coffee.
Yeah, it's faith over
breakfast.
Not a balanced breakfast, but it is still breakfast.
We never ever have said that our breakfast is balanced.
No, we didn't.
I mean, yours was the most balanced.
Nor that our conversation was balanced, but that's a whole nother topic.
Or fair, for that matter.
Oh. So, well, hey, thanks to the Gilchrists who made us some scones. That was really cool. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This is really nice.
And thank you, Eric, for pushing the button on your automatic espresso machine.
Oh, those are really good.
Yeah, very good.
Well, I guess we should thank the kids too, right?
I thought they were all in the same Gilchrist family.
Right.
I didn't single anybody out.
Kate.
Name
Thank
them.
you.
Yeah. Corey, Colleen. There.
Mr. Hand thanks you.
We named Mr. Hand. What?
Oh, yeah. So there's a phenomenon in my church called Mr. Hand. So about halfway through COVID, maybe 2/3 of the way through this pandemic, I started doing our Apostles' Creed and the Lord's Prayer with Mr. Hand. So, he's like, hello, my name is Mr. Hand. Hi, Mr. Hand. That kind of thing. Everybody.
Because the kids used to come up and interact with you.
And they love Mr. Hand.
Okay.
So my kids, when they were little, like Mr. and Mrs. Hand, who would come out and tell them stories and get in fights with each other and argue about stuff and tease each other. It was pretty funny.
And then your kids were like, my parents never fight, but Mr. and Mrs. Hand. Oh my gosh.
That's right.
It's rough with those two.
No, they need some marriage counseling.
Yeah. You're like, yeah, wow. Didn't see that. Well, it's been a couple weeks. You've been like the cancel king. You've been really into cancel culture. You've been canceling Faith Over Breakfast.
And do you know what I found? In this canceling, so that we're gone to basically every other week.
Yeah. People like it more?
We have more listeners. We had 438 downloads, which is up 300% over our regular week.
I continue to love that you care. I never think of checking, but that's cool. That's great.
I care.
I know you do. And that's sweet. Okay. Well, great. Cancel away.
I feel like over COVID, I have like 4 subjects to talk about.
Yeah. Well, there are things to talk about. It's just it's all feels like it's being talked about so much, and it's exhausting. So let's talk about Rod's birthday.
We should, but I'd like to add a segment first called Rumors Heard on the Street.
Oh.
I just heard an interesting rumor today. I mean, you wanted it to be fact-checked, but that's why we have an audience.
Okay.
So here's the rumor I heard from, and I'll say who I heard it from. I heard from Caleb Sommitz, and he said that he heard, so this is like, let's see, 1, 2, that 50 years from now, Tucson will be inhabitable. Inhabitable. We won't be able to inhabit Tucson due to how hot it is. But I thought, you know what? Arizonans, we love heat. Like I've been here since I was little. It's been hot.
Yeah, I mean, this is like this crazy, there's been a lot of heat. But I mean, there have been years, didn't it hit 118 here one time? And I mean, there's never been a summer in Tucson where I've been like, you know what? This is pretty great. This is pretty nice and cool. Never happened. Yeah,
well, my favorite thing is when there's like, it hit, record heat. Last time it hit 118 was in 1932. And you're thinking, anything that happened like that between 1930 and 1950, people were probably thinking it's the end of the world.
Oh, sure.
The world's at war. There's a depression. And it's hot.
To steer completely away from that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah.
I just want to put the rumor on the street.
It's there. And I should say, we used to be on a radio show with Caleb, and and he had a built-in fact checker.
He did have a
yeah. So I think you all should go do that. This is in keeping with his
Justine.
Values. Yeah. Justine, are you there?
Listening?
Yeah. Go check the facts.
Give us a report, an email,
detailed report,
a detailed report.
Yep.
At least a paragraph.
That's it.
Yeah, we don't want it. She's a busy lady.
Page.
She makes all that bread.
Oh yeah. She has been baking.
Speaking of bread, Justine, how about a beautiful
breakfast
loaf
sandwich?
Yeah,
I knew you were going to go loaf.
You're going sandwich on homemade bread.
That's right. So I was reading I read a family history that my mom wrote last weekend on a little getaway I had to Bisbee, which is what I do. And, or I like to go to Bisbee, I should say. In that family history, number one, and I already knew this, my grandpa came down with Spanish flu and had to leave the military, and that changed his life. Oh. And then he wanted to be a cowboy, and he started a mini ranch and was kind of working on it. And then here comes the Depression the Dust Bowl. And
wow,
he, basically continued, lost everything a couple times and went on to, he made ends meet, but he never got to do with his life what he really wanted to do. And then the other thing, as I'm reading my family history, is I'm going, oh my goodness, so many people died before they were 40. So many people. Like, so many kids that died young. So many, people who had like 3-4 marriages because the people kept dying. Like, oh, they died of this, they died of that, they died of this. And this isn't ancient, history here. And so as I was reading through this, I tell you what, it kind of comforted me because I went, there are all these you read about all these eras of time that I knew were there, but it was something about looking at your family and how they struggled and people died and lost everything, and then they kept going, and I kind of thought to myself, this whole freak out about 2020, if you look at it in the context of all this, it's not as bad as I often feel it is when I compare it.
And I don't want to sound weird on this, but maybe it's just kind of normal.
Maybe every once in a while there's a bad year or 2 or 5.
So on Saturday, I went to a quote-unquote social distanced party. Well, there was about 7 of us, socially distanced, outside, chatting. And at that party, guy I'd met once or twice was there, older guy. And he was telling a little bit about his life story. That's why I would be telling the story. And he said that he had been born in Wisconsin, but that his parents left when he was like 4 months because they lost their son in the last pandemic.
Yeah.
And he was born in the 50s. And I said, what pandemic happened in the 50s, right? Because we've been talking about, well, apparently there was
Spanish flu. Yeah,
horrific flu.
I bumped
in the
into
50s. Over 200,000 people in the United States died. Now you're thinking there's probably only 200 million in the U.S. at that time.
Right. So percentage-wise.
Serious pandemic.
Yeah. I did bump into, and I forget exactly, it might have been around then, but another, in the family history, there was some other thing that swept through, and polio.
I think in the era of antibiotics and vaccines, we have, and cities and wealth, we've become maybe we're not in touch with death, and we're not in touch with how fragile our lives actually are.
I think that is very true. I think that's very true. I was thinking about this in light of some refugee folks I know who just seen so much death, and thinking, this is so traumatic. I've heard the word traumatic thrown around a lot more lately than ever, and it's interesting because subtly in my mind, and I don't mean to criticize folks, but I've thought, I don't think this actually qualifies as trauma. And now I know you have a lot of thoughts on trauma, but I'm saying, like, in the grand scale, like, you walk into your village and 500 people have been mowed down with machine guns trauma versus, like, I have to wear a mask when I walk into the store, I feel traumatized. I mean, those are...
Yes.
They're hard to compare to me. It's hard to use the same word for me.
If you're talking about Rwanda, you're talking about what's happening in China right now. If you're talking about Sarajevo and the decimation there, like, yes, this is not traumatic. World War II, Vietnam, any war-torn space, totally agree with you. And
even certain places where they've been ravaged by some kind of sickness or plague in a way that, kind of makes this feel like it's not that bad. Anyway, there's that. But anyway, all that to say, having read all that over, it made me walk away and go, I think we don't know how to deal with death and accept that it does happen, and it's a natural rhythm of history and life, and sometimes there are periods where there's more of it, and just general, like, loss of even economic loss. Like, we're so used to everything just being there and stable, and here comes my check, and
right, at least for a good majority of us. Yeah, that's very true.
Especially those of us who are younger. So, I mean, that's not to say it doesn't affect you, but
no, and I think depending on your story and how you understand your life, I mean, unfortunately, trauma has some subjective elements to it. Your brain just reacts, and
right. That's of course true.
But
and I've observed that in my short life here on Earth, is one person can be genuinely rocked by one situation that another person seems to just kind of shrug their shoulders and go, "Oh well."
Right.
And you can't tell somebody not to feel what they feel.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, with that said, not many. I mean, I think a lot of people who listen to Faith Over Breakfast know Rod Hugen, but not all of them know Rod Hugen, because we have people who listen all over the world.
Speaking of trauma, we're going to talk about Rod Hugen.
Yeah, Rod Hugen. But before we talk about Rod Hugen, I listen to a lot of podcasts. And in the middle of podcasts, they have these things where they open their sponsor says something, or so I want to say,
are we even in the middle?
Yeah, well, we are.
Okay.
Here. So, Faith Over Breakfast today has been brought to you by Gilchrist Scones. How do you get a Gilchrist scone? Nobody knows. It's a mystery, but they take care of Faith Over Breakfast. If you want one, you'll need to learn the special handshake.
Oh, okay. But don't do the handshake now because of,
Well, it's special, so
social distancing.
It may not actually involve hands.
Oh, okay.
It could just be some strange waving. I don't know what it actually is.
Mr. Distance Hand.
And we want to thank, once again, the Gilchrist Scone Company for delivering 2 delicious scones to us.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Very good. By the way, did you notice the flavor?
Yes, it was maple.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maple
Somebody
scone.
loves you, Eric.
Well, like you said, 99.9% of listeners to Faith Over Breakfast are villagers.
That's right.
And you keep saying that. So I would like to put out another challenge. So the village has thrown down with some scones, and now it's Mission Church's time to up the ante and bring us something for breakfast.
Ooh.
We're throwing down here.
Okay.
Prove to us and prove to Andy that you listen to Faith Over Breakfast. You love him, and you want to bring him breakfast.
Oh, okay.
And see if I can make Andy any more uncomfortable.
Yeah. Wow. No worries.
So Rod Hugen, who is my coworker, and I've known for 20 some odd years.
Yeah, we've had him on here before. We talk about him sometimes. Co-pastor, co-worker of Eric, kind of
founder of the village with me.
Founder of the village with Eric. And what's the right word? There's a mentor, breakfast provider, story and breakfast provider for myself and a group of people that have kind of gathered around the breakfast that he and I were having for a while. So we've got a Wednesday breakfast club, if you will, that's been steadily on the grow.
I have visited, but didn't feel like I belonged there. So.
And you really didn't. It was it's an interesting thing. I don't know.
So
we discovered something, that everybody at Wednesday breakfast likes old country music to some degree, and you just don't, man.
Well, I like Johnny Cash.
Yeah, everybody likes Johnny Cash.
No, they don't.
Every single person in the world likes him.
After he did Hurt, but yes.
Okay.
Anyway, so let's just do some counseling here before we talk about Rod. How did you feel about sharing your breakfast with all these people? Because it was you and Rod, and I know what it's like to be with Rod,
Oh,
he's a cool guy, and he likes to talk and listens well, and he usually buys you breakfast. Mm-hmm. So it's like, a free breakfast.
Yeah, I mean, that didn't change, so that's
you didn't
cool.
lose that.
No, it's actually, it's been really cool to see what I think Rod has. It's appropriate that Rod should be listened to by younger men, men and women, but in this case, a group of young men who are sitting with an older man and listening, and bouncing their thoughts off of him and each other. I think there should be way more of it in the world. I think Rod's the kind of guy that sets the table for that. We've been talking there a little bit about why that works. And I think he's willing to tell his stories. He is providing the breakfast. There's that.
And it's a big deal.
And the breakfast and the space. But also he doesn't have this agenda. And he even joked the last time, he's like, well, that's what you think, which is true. He has ideas. He has things he wants to see happen, but he doesn't make it happen. It's not a meeting. It does not feel like a meeting. It's really relational time, and it can go anywhere. And he rolls with it and lets that happen. And I think that's a really unique thing. And it's not like on this quick timer of like, sit down, tell me the things, and we're out. It's actually a long a long breakfast.
Yeah, like what,
2-3 hours.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I used to have those breakfasts for years and years with Rod, and real 3 hours.
Yeah.
4 hours, and and then I'm like, Rod, I
think I gotta go.
Work to do.
Yeah, and that happens where one of us inevitably is like, I gotta go, but it's usually the reverse when you're kind of a younger leader and there's somebody who has wisdom. You feel like you have to like get squeezed in, when they have to go, and so it kind of gets flipped. And I think he does do a good job of he is a good listener, but he also is very willing to speak and will, kind of go on and on with a story. But the cool thing is, and he tells them over and over, but they get stuck in your head and you start to remember things that
Rodisms.
cares about, Rodisms. So anyway, how do I feel about it? I do miss, getting to work through some of my own stuff. I feel like, when you have a group of 6 or 7, instead of just 2 of you, it's a whole different dynamic. So sometimes I miss that, but I think it's good. I like it. And I also, the other people who are around the table bring things too. And I think that it's cool to see Rod, getting to have that influence, and even seeing churches maybe being born out of these conversations, which is cool. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm good with it. But every once in a while I go, I wish I could have talked about that thing today.
Yeah, of course. Well, yeah, and I think that the nice thing with Rod is that, he the village affords him this opportunity to be this mentor to people.
Yeah. And the classes of CRC that
certainly financially they do.
Yeah.
Provide that. But he doesn't, he has these big blocks of time that he can use for these things.
Right.
Which I think is a really cool thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And he doesn't have to rush off to do
right.
X, Y, and Z. Whereas I've tried to do some of that, and I eventually am like, I don't have the space for this. I barely have the space for my own, for our community. So it really has become Rod's ministry, and it's been cool that way.
Which is really, it is cool. And I appreciate it. It was, you kind of made the connection. So hey,
I feel like for once in my life, like I'm not one of the connector people.
You don't tend to, there aren't a bunch of couples that are like, Eric saw me and he saw me and he knew we should be married.
No, but I feel like when I talk to you, or when I talk to like Caleb, who's been on this podcast before, I feel like, and there are a number of other people, like you're connectors. Like somebody will say like, oh yeah, I was talking to Andy and like, that's how we ended up over here. That's how I got here. Oh, I met so-and-so through Andy, or through Caleb, and I'm not that person.
Or like, Andy offended me, and so I came to this church instead. Yeah.
I hear more to that. Actually.
Right.
We need to talk. That's the change for this podcast. Let's talk about that now. No, and so I think it's fun that I kind of started that process, because I don't ever get to be there, But it was, I think Rod... And we're just going to talk about Rod. It's just be funny.
It was his birthday yesterday.
Yeah, it's
for
his birthday,
context.
68 years old.
We said something like that, yeah.
But it's been, as he's been transitioning, in some ways, like transitioning into I'd say over like 6-7 years of letting me take the reins and have someone who works alongside me. He has attempted to create these different, church plants. In the Christian Reformed Church, and it hasn't been going well.
Right, which was is getting him down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I felt like when I was excited that like what you brought to the table and what he could actually connect into something that was already happening instead of getting people to like make it happen.
Right.
And so that's been really cool.
Which is just in the whole church planting realm, by the way. I don't know why I want to do this right now, but I feel like that paradigm is really important. Like getting people to try to do the idea that you have is an extremely difficult thing to do, just in general.
Mm-hmm.
So you're like, I want to see a church happen in East Tucson. I'm going to go find a person who could do that for me. The trouble is, you and you alone probably have this vision.
Right.
And so that, I think, must be a very frustrating thing and probably works some percentage of the time, but probably a lower percentage of the time. The more effective thing would be, especially in church planting, as with probably a lot of other ventures, find somebody who is going to do it. They are doing it, they are moving, and team up. That just seems, and I don't know why in church planting circles it's always like you got to go find the pro, run them through all the things. Right. And I think that's, so, it's attempting to not put a bad person out there or an ill-equipped person out there.
I agree.
But at the same time, how many times does that person not really have the vision? It probably works when that person knows where they're going and they kind of use this church planting network to just help them along the way.
Sure.
But when you're out there going, we need somebody for, East Tucson, I don't know. It doesn't tend to work.
Those are all, I guess when it comes to Rod, though, he's 68 years old.
68 feet tall.
He started the village at 48, and I'm now 48.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's interesting.
Yeah, so I was 28 when I planted the village with Rod, and so we've done this for a long time. And there's a couple qualities about Rod that I appreciate more than, and I don't think everybody sees these qualities, but they affect and define like the village in a lot of ways. And one is that Rod may be sometimes internally flappable, but he is never flappable. Like the most horrible things can be happening.
Yeah.
And, Rod is very much able to sit in those, think about them clearly. And later on, he may be in a place where he's like kind of trying to wrestle with those, but he is able to not allow his anxiety to like override onto yours.
Which is why you've called him the human Xanax.
Right. I do call him the human Xanax because he's able to keep that. So that's one thing. The second thing is that Rod, he is like, his whole gifting is to reframe things. So you can't like win an argument with Rod because he will just reframe whatever you said until it fits what he's thinking. But that's on the bad side. On the good side, he's really good at helping you rethink the stuff that you're struggling with by reframing it in a new context. And he does that really well when he's doing it out of a gospel context.
Yeah.
Of helping people really think about what they're dealing with or what problem or where they need to go in the context of who Jesus is and what Jesus might be calling them to. That's really powerful. So the other thing is the third thing that I love about Rod, and he would also argue that this is a both a benefit and a sin part, and he and I both have this, but he's extremely loyal. Like he's the guy that when the Titanic is going down, he's part of the band playing as it sinks because he's loyal to the boat.
Yeah.
And I think that's beautiful when that loyalty is given to a person.
Yeah.
It can be abused, but when you know that somebody, no matter what happens to you, has your back and they're never ever going to leave.
Oh, it's incredible.
It is a powerful,
unique thing.
Powerful experience to be a friend to Rod in that context. So, yeah.
And you have more years. I mean, I could sense that, but 20 years of experiencing that is
and we worked for two different, like we worked for the village, but we were actually coworkers before that. So we've worked together for a while. No,
that's cool. That's really good. Yeah, I felt a couple things that were really refreshing with Rod. This was mentioned by I think it was John, one of our
young men,
up and coming leaders at Mission. But he observed Rod and I in a conversation in which we disagreed, and that's been basically like every single one of them to some degree. Like, when we first sat down, I think he called, something about my website, like the dumbest website he'd ever seen in his whole entire life or something. And these are the moments where I'm like, what the heck, are you serious? But then on the flip side, I'm like, I like this guy because we're actually, this won't be a waste of my time.
Right.
It won't be a waste of my time. He's going to at least push me to be better. And I didn't change a whole lot about that website. And he still feels the same way about it. But, it's not really there anymore, but, but we've been pushing back and forth. He always kind of pushed back on some of my stuff. And there were things where I was like, nah, I don't know about that. Some of his things that I think you guys have adopted at the Village would be, kind of showing forth like a very small amount of theology. Like here's, publicly, like here's like a very Apostles' Creed, that's it. Though you guys, you have a lot of theology. I kind of did the reverse where I showed, it was like, here's the whole library. Look, feel free to take a look. But then when you come inside, you realize it's fine to not agree with every, there's a lot of room in here to disagree and wrestle with it. It's kind of a, reverse method. But we would always kind of work that stuff out and push it back and forth. So one time John observed us talking about something that is a church dividing kind of issue. And not conceding to one another necessarily, but very comfortable. We just kind of, I don't see where you get that. And then Rod goes off on a thing, I'm going, awesome story, but I don't see how that corresponds to reality. It was some kind of conversation like that. And we just kind of kept eating breakfast and laughed and moved on and talked about other things. And I didn't even think twice about it. But John, his big takeaway afterward is he's like, I've never seen Christians disagree so comfortably. And I think that I don't experience that with very many people either. I think Rod was the defining factor in that. I knew I could freely disagree with Rod because he's not going anywhere. He's not going to, throw up his hands or get mad at me. He's going to have his opinion and he'll say it, which I appreciate, but I don't feel like we're in jeopardy of losing relationship over it. And so I felt freedom to have my thought and my opinion. And he has changed my mind about things.
Sure.
Over the years.
He's very persuasive.
And, yeah. And so, and I'm grateful for that. And in other areas, at least not yet, and maybe never, I don't know. But I think that's something he does really well. I mean, I talked about listening, storytelling as well, but that ability to adamantly disagree with you and still make you feel like the relationship isn't in jeopardy. I think that's a unique gift, and I wish more people had it. I was at an event, and all the pastors there were talking about how they didn't have anybody to talk to and all this stuff. And I think an interesting thing in my life is we've got the TGC pastors, you and I get together and talk, Rod and I get together and talk. I was sitting there at the table and I realized I feel like I'm the only one that this is not an issue.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Yeah. And so I talked about like, well, I've got, there's this guy Rod, and then there's some other pastors, and so on and so forth. And yeah, all of them were like, wow, how'd you do this? And he just honestly has the denomination helps. He buys breakfast. He has time. And that people, were just like, oh, we need more of this. And so there's a part of me that thinks every denomination needs to just give their older folks with listening skills credit cards, and you develop way more leaders. And that's probably sort of true. But the other thing is, not everybody can do what Rod does.
Yeah, he has 20 years of training.
20 years of training.
More than that of a lifetime, but yeah.
Yeah, and just some of these skills that, just personality traits that make it work.
I would agree with that. I think there's one thing, though, that Rod has that is missing in maybe even a lot of older people. And I think it's the reason why he's able to disagree and agree, and still be committed.
This might be the stuff I'm getting at. Yeah, keep going. I'm curious to work this out.
I think Rod has a deep, deep, deep relationship with Jesus. And what people experience is what it would be like to sit with Jesus. They get tastes of that. And so, as much as, I'll be honest, I've known Rod for, I think I met him in 1998. So we're talking, 22 years or something like that?
Yeah.
I know all Rod's stories. Right. I've been part of some of Rod's stories, and when I heard them retold, they're not how he told them. That's not how the story happened. But it's much more interesting, right? So I know all of Rod's stories, and I know he loves to embellish and tell these stories.
I can tell that happens, too. Sometimes I'm like, I'm not sure this event happened quite this profoundly.
Profoundly, yeah.
Yeah.
But when people sit with Rod, they get that taste of Jesus. And so I think that comes from a long cultivated time of praying and being in his scripture and being committed to a life with Jesus as his primary thing. That is why I'm with Rod, because Rod and I don't have a lot in common.
Right.
But we do have Jesus in common, and our pursuit of Jesus is very similar. And so we connect in that way, and I see people attracted to Rod because they taste Jesus.
Yeah, and that's even when I thought about that idea of denominations giving their older folks cards, I kind of cringe at my own idea because I go, I've sat with a lot of those folks, and just because they have ministry experience and stuff, it's not
the same.
Right. It needs to be people who are going to offer something of more, not, it doesn't have anything to do with, the particular stories or or the particular opinions. It has to do with that. Yeah. Really being, knowing Jesus, being with him, sharing of that.
Yeah.
Which allows for a lot of these other traits to come, like being okay with conflict, being okay with disagreeing.
Right. Being like his faith in Jesus and his understanding of how Jesus sees him as his, son and as the son of the Father, and that connection to God is deep enough for him to be like, okay, well, and we could talk about it. Well, you don't agree on infant baptism, that's fine, I don't care, or you don't agree on these, ministry philosophies, that's fine, we can work around that.
Right.
That's not about Jesus.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of who he is that he's able to not get, his panties in a wad, basically, on things. He can let people explore things. He can listen. He can offer good.
He can allow somebody to work out something over 2 to 3 years.
Yes.
He's okay with it. Patience. Yeah. Because a lot of folks, if you're not on the same page in meeting one,
right.
And this goes both ways. There's a lot of like mentor types that if you're not going to be their perfect mentee, then forget it.
Yeah.
And then there's folks I've met with in the church where I push back on them on one thing and they never want to talk to me again.
Right.
And so that to have a relationship where somebody will, like, the wrestling can go on for some time and the commitment is still there is rare.
Yeah. Here's the thing that I think is fascinating about Rod that I think I really love about him, and why I always know that he'll defend me and he'll defend what the village thinks, and he'll also why he can let other people think what they want to do and think about it, is he demands that people live out their principles. So if you believe something and he disagrees with it, he doesn't care.
He'll be like, great, do it then.
He just wants you to do it all the way out. He wants you to live it out to the implications and feel the impact of the implications, so that you're actually have integrity in what you believe, and not say, well, I believe this, but then never really have to deal with it in a relational context with people.
Sure.
And I've seen so many times where people have belief systems and they're like, yeah, that's what I believe. And then he's like, okay, well, but in this context, in this situation, this is what that would look like. Are you willing to do that?
Right.
You know, and people are like, well, or yes,
like submission to authority. That's one of his favorite conversations.
He thinks more people need to submit. That is a big deal.
It's a huge one for him. But then again, like,
I agree with him.
I do too. And then, but a lot of people who will say they agree with it won't actually. Right. So then he'll go, so would you do something you don't believe is true because your elders say so? I'd be like, no. Then you're not interested in submission. Like, you know, he'll just kind of cut it off, right? It'd be like, so,
right?
Are you really into submission? Because that sure doesn't sound like you are. Because submission isn't just I do what others say when it's what I would say. That's not submission at all. And so, yeah, he's good at making you examine. Do I really? Because if you're not willing to do that, then you better not go around talking about how you're into submission.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rod has had a remarkable influence over so many people. But it's sort of it's an underground thing. You know, Dr. Larry Crabb talks about in his book Silence of Adam. Do you remember? Did you ever read that book?
Yep. It's called Men of Courage or something.
They changed the name.
Yeah. But
somewhere in that book he talks about his dream about having elders who are just so committed to who God is and courage, basically, that there's a long line of people, like they don't promote themselves, but because their relationship with God is so dynamic that people seek them out. Yeah. That he longs for a church of that. And I think Rod fulfills that dream of Larry's in many ways. Really, people are seeking him out to be with him. So I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yep. Well, happy birthday, Rod.
Happy birthday, Rod.
And we're glad you're in our lives.
Yep.
And, see you tomorrow morning for some breakfast.
Yeah, if I'm on the ball, maybe I'll get this podcast up and going today.
Within 2 weeks of his birthday.
2 weeks of his birthday.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Well, man, good to see you.
It is good to see you.
And thank you for the coffee.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you again, Gilchrist Scones, for the delicious pastries. That sustained us through this conversation.
And if you want to be a part and highlighted at Faith Over Breakfast, send us some food, deliver it somehow to us, and we'll sponsor you.
Yeah.
Instead of you sponsoring us, we'll promote you on our
As Eric said before, if we're to keep true to our name too, like,
we gotta have
breakfast. If you want to come here and cook a breakfast, I mean, that would help us be authentic.
Yeah.
Which we were just saying before we went on air, nobody's doing that anymore. So let's give it a try. I guess we could also make our own breakfast, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, good to talk to you. Rod 68. Find a guy like Rod. And but no more coming to my breakfast. It's getting
Did you
crowded.
guys max it?
I think we're getting there. Yeah.
Wow, that could be controversy.
I know.
At breakfast.
Well, we'll talk about it. So, no more.
You have to be on a rotating basis.
Yeah. But,
well, this is the time when the oldest in the group, next to Rod, has to split off and take a few people and start his own breakfast. Cause
well, that could happen.
Who is the oldest? You?
No, there's a Nick.
Nick?
There's a guy named Nick, not Lang.
Oh, different
another Nick. He would be the oldest in the group, but also one of the newest. So I don't know. What that means.
That's probably not.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Anyway,
well,